For
And I'm
now.
recording.
Coolio. Um, so hello everyone. I'm joined here today by a very nice feller by the name of Inductica. Uh, a fan favorite apparently. People have been asking me, Guy specifically, who is in the chat right now, I believe. He's been asking me to talk to you and check out your stuff for so long, but I've been putting it off because I wasn't interested specifically in the STEM stuff at that time. But now I've started looking into it. I'm very impressed by a lot of the things uh, you're having to say. Do you want to just give like a introduction to who you are, what it is you do, why it's so impressive?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm an objectivist philosopher and physicist, and my big project over at Inductica is to reprove all of physics from the beginning from starting from the beginning, give an inductive reproof of all physics up through quantum mechanics and relativity. And the reason I think that all of that work is necessary is because um, I think that quantum mechanics and relativity are flawed theories. And there's actually quite a few people who think that, but what I find is that they're constantly using little bits and pieces of these flawed theories in their reasoning when trying to correct or replace these theories. And so, in my view, the only way to really, truly, genuinely start over is to actually reprove everything so that you know you're starting from a strong foundation. And I've actually written a theory of induction in order to produce that foundation. And so I have sort of a preliminary theory. I'm almost done with the book, although an early version of the book, you can find it on my Patreon page. If you want to pay for it, you can get the early version. And now that that early version is done, it's enough for me to begin actually reproving um, all of math and physics. Well, not all of it, but the essentials of math and physics, starting with basically cavemen counting rocks. So that's a quick introduction to what I do.
Yeah, it's very nice. And so we've got like a sort of roadmap we're gonna roughly stick to, I think here. I think uh, the main problem which you're going for here is you're looking for this theory of induction now. Um, the theory of induction, it's not obvious why it would be such a big hole, right? But like when you look at the history of philosophy, the naive sort of way that most people would approach it is just like, oh yeah, this keeps happening again. You keep sticking your key in your car and it keeps turning on day after day after day. This is like the sort of enumeration theory of induction. But by the time we get to David Hume, we find that not only can the enumeration theory not give you certainty, which is what skeptics have been saying for so long. It's like, well, how do you know it's still going to do that after the 10 millionth time? But it also can't even give you probability, right? Because it might seem like, okay, well, if it's happened a million times, then it's really, really probable that this is true. But if you don't actually have the certainty first, then you can't get the probability. Because this probability, it's only
Yeah,
probable that that's probable, and that's only probable, and that's only probable, and you go on forever, and you don't have anything at that point. So do you want to like give like
yeah, right.
sort of what is the problem of induction then? How do we move from sort of specifics to generals? Is that a good way to put it? Like how would you put it, I
Yeah,
suppose?
I do agree with that formulation. I don't think it's obvious that that's the right way to formulate it, but in the final analysis, I do end up agreeing with that formulation. That how do you go from looking at specific cases, uh, this water conducts electricity, this water conducts electricity, this, and how do you end up moving from that to all water conducts electricity? Um, so. Uh, that would be an example, and that's an example I like to look at because I think uh, that generalization ends up being, in my view, it's correct in a certain early context of knowledge, and then later some of the scientists in the audience are probably noticing, well, no, like water doesn't conduct electricity. Water's an insulator. So I'll get into that, and I think different generalizations are warranted at different stages of scientific progress. Um, but to talk about the problem of induction, Um, Basically, the idea is that you can see as many instances, no matter how many instances you get, it never on its own proves that all of the instances of that thing, all of the instances of water, let's say, are going to conduct electricity. And of course, later we find out that water is an insulator. So run electricity through this sample of water and this sample and this sample and this sample, and they all conduct electricity. And then 100 years later, you find out, oh, we should really think of water as an insulator. So, that I'm picking this as sort of an example that seems to demonstrate the problem, which is, well, how could you ever be certain that they're all like that? I consider that to be half of the problem of induction. There's actually another element of the problem. There's another half of the problem, I would say, and that's, how do you know they're going to keep being like that? So the classic example, the sun has risen, X number of times. How do you know it's going to keep rising? Or, let's take something simpler. Let's say um, metal conducts electricity. Metal does conduct electricity. How do you know it's going to keep conducting electricity? What if something changes? How do you know it won't change? And my book gives, it turns out that my book only gives um, a solution to half of the problem of induction. It gives a solution to the part where you ask, how do you know they're all like that? I have an associate, Ron Pizzaturo, who's also an objectivist philosopher, and he has a solution to the problem of, how do you know it's going to keep being like that? To put it crudely, he has a solution to the other part, and he actually has a solution. His solution involves probabilities, and there's of course Hume's objection, as you mentioned, that if it's probabilities all the way down, then you keep multiplying the probabilities, and they basically go to zero. Ron has a way of circumventing that problem, and his way of figuring this out is to basically, there's a core foundation of our knowledge in his view, and I agree with him. Core foundation of our knowledge that's non-probabilistic, that we can count on with 100% certainty. And then from that, we can form what he calls inductive generalizations, which are based on statistical reasoning, actually. And these statistical reasonings are able to give us generalizations that, 99.9999999% probability. And at that point, you're practically certain. And what I mean by practically certain is that in any practical case, you should treat it as a certainty, since that 0.00001 is irrelevant for any kinds of actions you may need to take. But sometimes it is, and you have to actually weigh the probability that you could be wrong in certain cases. And so Ron gives us a calculus. Ron Pizzaturo gives us a calculus of this probability in induction, which I really agree with. That being said, what my book focuses on is, it's on the premise that you can make these. It's on the premise that you do have some kind of way of validating sensory knowledge, and you have a way of validating that your generalizations are going to persist into the future. And given those things, how do you then conduct science? And that includes a solution to the question, how do you know they're all like that? How do you know all water will conduct electricity? So you can think of my work as sort of like, almost like the engineering of philosophy. If Pizzaturo and Descartes, or just Descartes being another example, are focused on fundamentals, mine is more of an application of those fundamentals towards actually performing science and actually proving things. But that requires that I kind of build off of basic epistemological foundations that are established by mainly Ayn Rand and Ron Pizzaturo.
Yeah, I notice there is um, a sort of conspicuous omission there. You said Ayn Rand and Ron Pizzatiro, but I think probably most objectivists, when they think theory of induction, they're going to start thinking of Leonard Peikoff and David Harmon's theory of induction. Because I mean, I was reviewing it earlier today, and it does seem eminently reasonable to me. It can account for things like Newton being certain that his laws are correct generalizations, whilst not being negated by later advancements upon them that they don't always hold in certain circumstances, because A holds under certain circumstances requires that A holds in the first place. Um, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and even Pizzatiro, you were talking about his theory of the probability, how he solved the probability problem, and it sounded a lot like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, sound a lot like this sort of base of knowledge that he's starting with. Those sound like the first level generalizations or Peikoff's axioms of induction.
Mm.
So would you like to comment at all on that? Do you agree with some parts of Peikoff?
Oh yeah.
You,
So yeah, let me ask you what you read the logical leap, but not validation, not Ron's book, I'm guessing.
I have not actually read the Logical Leap yet. I was just I was rewatching his axioms of induction lectures earlier today.
Oh, have you listened to the whole? Well, I don't know. Have you listened to at least half of Leonard Peikoff's, what's it called, Induction in Physics and Philosophy? Have you
Yes,
listened
yes,
to at least half of that?
yes.
Okay, then if you've listened to half of that, then and you really understood it, then you've basically read the theoretical part of the logical leap. The logical leap is really just a book form of those
Mm.
lectures. There's the logical leap's a little clearer on the edges, but like you basically got it. So yeah.
I will say
I
I listened to
disagree
them
with
like
parts of the
once
logical.
over, so
Yeah.
I'm not like I wouldn't be able to recite it
Okay.
or anything.
Right, right. I mean, but you gave a good account of the essence, which is that like it all rests on first level generalizations. Um, so in my view, Peikoff's theory is a mixed case. I would say parts of it are right and parts of it are wrong. Let me start with the parts that are right, actually, because I shouldn't have omitted it earlier. I really should. I should have included. Well, what I was trying to include in that list, where I basically said Ayn Rand and Ron Pizzaturo, what I was including just like the foundations, basically the basic philosophic foundations, as opposed to the more applied philosophical generalizations pertaining to scientific method itself. Um, and I think that's what both me and Peikoff are trying to do here. And I think Peikoff only gets it about roughly 50% right, is what I would say. Um, so I guess I'll summarize the logical leap. So first of all, like what Peikoff says is the way induction works is that there are it is that we start we start as children grasping first level generalizations. And the way that that's done is that there are certain causal connections out in nature that we can see, and we can simply watch them unfold at the perceptual level. In objectivism's view, everything that is perceived is understood with certainty, and that there are certain arguments that objectivism gives that this base foundational level of our knowledge, perception, can't be wrong, since that's the basis of all of our other knowledge. The way you can think about it is that when Hume talks about, well, we can't be sure that we have contact with reality. As he utters that sentence, he's using a bunch of concepts he derived from sense perception. So there's nowhere else to get the content. So any kind of skeptic argument against perception is self-refuting. Now that still leaves it open to someone to actually show how we know positively that sense perception connects us with reality, and I think Pizzaturo achieves that, incidentally. But that's the objectivist argument against Hume right there. Anyway, once that's established, then we go into once that kind of foundational stuff is established, we go into a theory of induction. And Peikoff therefore starts with these first level generalizations. There's certain connections in nature that you can understand at the first level. So one of the examples he gives is balls roll. And if you look at some of the secondary literature on this, the reason he thinks that this is a first level generalization, that you can be certain of it, is because a child is able to see how the roundness and solidity of the ball actually gives rise to its rolling. Not only can you see that it happens to roll, you can see that it has to roll. You can see that by its nature it must roll. So that's the I'm giving a very plausible case for a theory I actually don't agree with here, which is interesting. But so the idea here is that the way that you form a generalization is by forming a causal connection, by identifying some connection between these things are a certain way, therefore they have to act a certain way. So this example would be, it's round, it's solid, so it's gotta roll, instead of, sliding or walking. Obviously it can't walk. An understanding of the fact that, on some level, an understanding of the fact that there's friction, you will then understand that it has to roll instead of sliding, stuff like this. So the idea is that there are things that you can simply grasp on the perceptual level, and you're able to form generalizations like that. And there's just this litany of these base level generalizations that we accumulate as children, and a few as adults probably. And these are really the foundations of science, because you take these basic generalizations and you build upon them to form higher and higher scientific knowledge. And Peikoff gives extreme detail in his lectures and in The Logical Leap. He gives extreme detail about the history of physics and how basically each stage of physics is built atop each other's stage, and how you need to understand this in order to understand the inductive proof of anything, really. This part, this historical or this aspect of logical order, I think this is the part that Peikoff gets right. And the degree to which he gets it right, it can't be overstated. So if I'm making it sound like I'm kind of a opponent of Peikoff, I want to just, I don't know, forget it. I'm a huge proponent of Peikoff because he gets this so right. I can't emphasize this enough. My entire career is based on the fact that Peikoff got this part right, that he really understood in detail how each stage of the scientific progression contributes to each other stage. And without that understanding of the progression, you can't have proof. So all my work is based on that thesis. So I've gotten flack before for criticizing Peikoff, because objectivists rightly are big hero worshippers. And so if you ever say something to disagree with one of their heroes, they get offended. I get it, but that's why I'm making this big statement. Yes, Peikoff is a huge hero. He did this right. That's why he gets an amazing amount of credit, even though I think part of the theory needs to be improved. So the idea is the way you justify a generalization, the way that you say all balls roll, is an understanding of balls are a certain kind of thing, so they have to do a certain kind of thing. That's what he thinks the basis of all generalizations are. So that's a quick summary of Peikoff's theory.
Mm-hmm.
And then you form those first level generalizations, and then that builds to higher ones. So that's the quick summary.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, that all seems very reasonable to me. Where do you think he goes wrong with this theory? Is it in applying it to something? Is it in some other aspect of it?
I think, what's interesting is I think the application of the theory, all the examples he gives, are really, really good. And throughout the book and throughout the lectures, and then the work of his assistant David Harriman in actually going through a history of physics and understanding it in its proper order and understanding how each stage gave rise to the next stage, like all those concretes are really, really good. It's actually the theory I disagree with. The application ends up being way better than the theory, I think. So here's where I disagree with the theory. I don't think you need a causal connection in order to prove a generalization. I think it helps, or well, it's not that it helps. I think that's one way to do it. But here's something you need to notice. When you say all balls roll and you ask, okay, well, how do you know that? And you give some sort of account of the causal connection. You say, oh, well, balls have a certain shape, they have solidity, and so by that nature, it has to roll. What you're doing is you're reasoning from a generalization there. Any causal connection presupposes a generalization. You're presupposing that balls are solid and that they're round. Now, you might say validly, well, James, that's just what it frickin' means to be a ball. Like if it's not solid and it's not round, then it's just not a ball. And I would say to that, yes, of course, that is what it means to be a ball. But here's the thing, like that is in itself a generalization. We make generalizations all the time that are just a matter of classification. Now, in the case of balls, classification is not difficult. Like people don't screw up classification when it comes to shapes and like is it solid or liquid. But here's what's interesting. In more complex cases, you can get categorization wrong. So your audience and objectivists are going to be especially familiar with the false generalization that selfishness is wrong. Or selfishness, actually, here's the generalization. Selfishness involves hurting other people, right? Because people accept that generalization, they have a certain categorization. They categorize selfishness a certain way. Their concept of selfishness has implicit generalizations in it. So sometimes you'll get I don't know, you can tell me, Zulu, if have you ever gotten the argument, like, that's just what it means to be selfish. Screwing over other people is just what it means to be selfish, Zulu. You can't change the word. You ever gotten that argument?
Yeah, generally, then it'll probably devolve into some sort of nominalist ranting or something. Like, well, I just want to use the words that
so
way.
We need to Yeah, so I think part of Ayn Rand's insight that led her to overturning this faulty concept of selfishness is understanding that concepts are objective. There's a right and a wrong way to use the word. You don't get to just use the word however you want. Actually, you do. You do get to use the word however you want, but you might be wrong. You may be misunderstanding reality when you do this. You might be mixing together properties that don't necessarily go together, like being self-interested and hurting other people. Those don't necessarily go together, and you're accepting a false generalization implicitly if you do lump them together. So at the higher level, we make true and false generalizations all the time just from our categorization. So in my view, the real part of proper generalization is proper conceptualization, proper categorizing. And as a result, I think it's enough to simply say, to generalize, all you need to do is simply say, hey, I ran electric current through some samples of water. I'm unaware of any impurities in this water. I used all the known methods to purify the water. I ran the current through it, and the electricity ran through the water. So it's an electrical conductor. And so now what has happened is conductivity is just one of the things you're talking about when you say water. Now, it turns out later that you can extract the salts and the minerals, and then water becomes an insulator. But in that earlier context of knowledge, when you say water, you mean water with the salt in it, even though you're not aware of the salt or any of those impurities. You've never discovered distilled water yet. So when you say, so it doesn't even make sense for someone to say like, oh, well, later distilled water ends up being an insulator. Well, you hadn't discovered pure water yet. You had a different concept of what pure meant. Later, when you learned more, you went H2O and only H2O. But before you were aware of all that stuff and all these purification methods, water just meant the pure form of the stuff you find in rivers and streams, and that's valid in that earlier context. So there's two things we have to remember: is like part of generalization is categorization, and categorization validly changes as you learn more. And this second point, I owe a great deal to Peikoff, because Peikoff, part of his theory is that generalizations have to change over time based on your context of knowledge. As you learn more, things validly your generalizations validly change. And my contribution is that not only is that true of your generalizations, but it's also true of your concepts. What you mean by water validly changes over time as you learn more about the things. You need to like split the concepts into more pieces. If you go far enough, by the way, in science, you actually discover that there's a whole other species of water that nuclear engineers call heavy water. You ever heard of this?
Yeah, it's hydrogen with two neutrons in its nucleus. Or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's water, but then the hydrogen atoms are deuteriums, or yeah, like deuteriums with two. They're
It'll be a proton
it's normal water and a neutron. Yeah. So it's H2O, but the H's are not just a proton inside; it's a proton and a neutron. So it's like heavy hydrogen. I'm putting that in quotes because that's not what it's called. Heavy hydrogen that leads to heavy H2O, basically. And so it's still water, but it's a special type of water. So like your categories, and this is a kind of categorization that normal people don't need because they're not working inside of a nuclear reactor. So that's fine that they're unaware of that category. And then but once you do have that job, like, oh, do you flood the reactor with heavy water or with regular water? It ends up mattering for them. So we need different classification structures for different levels of knowledge. So anyway, so to summarize, the logical leap thinks that we prove generalizations through causal connections. My view is that that's not true. Because all causal connections presuppose earlier generalizations that you're reasoning from. You're making the assumption, oh, these sorts of things are a certain way, therefore they'll do a certain thing. Well, again, that presupposes that, balls are round. And even though, certain categorizations we don't tend to screw up, at the higher levels, categorization is very difficult to do properly. And so in my view, really the way you generalize is through proper categorization. And as you do that, it is enough to simply say, tested, these things, say it's water, and I found that it conducted electricity. So conductivity is just part of what I mean by water. So I lean heavily on categorization as proper categorization as justifying a generalization. So that's the difference between Peikoff and I.
Okay, so if I could try to maybe see if I understand this here, would you then be sort of, instead of having first level generalization as the root, rather it's the concepts involved in that generalization which are the root, and then just out of that falls whatever the first level generalizations would be?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm not. I think part of that's in line with my view, and part of it isn't. Let me think here. I think at the root is really the observations of the things. That's really what's at the root. And then from there, you have to properly categorize what you are seeing. and I give certain standards for how to properly categorize. I don't think I want to go into them right now because, but I'll go into them briefly. Basically, in general, proper categorization is achieved when your set of words that you use to identify the things um, are able to capture all the known facts. So, for example, our typical definition of selfishness or our typical concept of selfishness fails to capture the fact that some self interested people aren't screwing other people over. They're benefiting us enormously, like Jeff Bezos, making things available to us within a couple hours of when we order it at very cheap prices. Like, that's such a huge benefit to us. And if you conceptualize selfishness the way most people do, you just can't account for that. It's at odds with some of the things you hold to be true. So in general, I go into more detail than this in my theory, but to just give a high level overview, the ultimate standard of your conceptualization is can you capture all of the known facts with your conceptual framework? And if you can't, it means you have to rework your categories, basically. So you make observations, you categorize to try and capture all of the facts. Then implicit in those categorizations are a bunch of generalizations. Because because you say, oh, the clear fluid that we see in these certain circumstances, that's what I mean by water. If it's not clear, then we're probably not going to call it water. We absolutely aren't going to call it water. We may call it, dirty water or something, but it just isn't water. That's one of the uh, characteristics of water is that it is clear, to the human eye. So,
Or even another one,
so that
would I be right in this, that a generalization implicit in the concept of water being a clear fluid, that yada yada yada, is that fluids, we know that those are the things that flow.
yeah, right. And so you can, this incidentally, this is why you have to judge a conceptual framework as a whole, because what concepts mean relies on what some of the other concepts mean in your framework. So if you get one part wrong, you'll get other things wrong. Um, so that's so you need to categorize properly. Once you have categorized properly, there's a lot of generalizations you've now formed that are implicit in your categorization. Once you have that, you can actually use deduction to milk your categorization scheme for further knowledge. So, because once you've sort of systematized everything into a conceptual framework, deduction actually teaches you new things. So what would be an example? Um, so once here's a simple example. So once you know that water has weight, and once you know how much it weighs, and once you have a way of measuring volumes of water, then you can actually, I can't really do it without making drawings, but you can actually deduce the pressure something will feel once you put it under different depths of water. And that can simply be deduced from the earlier knowledge. So once you've made those generalizations about water, that it weighs a certain amount, and then you have certain ways of like measuring volumes, you can deduce from that the pressure of an object underwater will be equal to the density of the water times g, which is like a constant of gravity, times the depth of the water. And it turns out that simple formula follows by deduction. Now, you still have to make an experiment to test your deduction, not because your deduction might be wrong, because it can't be. You already know these things about it. You make a test at this point because maybe there are additional facts that your deduction didn't account for. Maybe the fluid does something in addition to the things that you're already aware. So you need to actually do the experiment to check for these additional possible factors. But once you do, and in this case, they found no additional factors. The deduction accounts for everything. Um, you now made a generalization from deduction, basically. And so once you have a conceptualization, once you have good conceptualization, you can actually make a lot of progress through deduction. You can make a lot of inductive progress through deduction. I consider deduction to be part of the inductive process, not the whole thing, but an important part of it. And we see all the time, like physicists making a lot of progress with pure deduction. They just take the things that are known so far and then reason to a new thing, and then they test it, and then yep, like it turns out my deduction accounted for everything, and that's a new discovery now. That happens all the time in physics. So that's in another. So that's sort of now there's more to my theory than that, but that's a summary of part of it right there.
Mhm. So would this then be related to, I believe they call it the spiral theory of knowledge, where you go out with an induction which you then use to deduct things, and then you keep spiraling out and out and out?
Oh, well, that's interesting because a later part of my theory actually accounts for the spiral process of knowledge. Um, I don't consider this part to really be the spiraling part. Um, yeah, it's similar. Let me think. To me, the example I gave is not really the spiraling part. That's more of just pretty much linear progress. Like you have certain things and then you make deductions and you just learn more things. But spiraling plays a role. Let me give an example of how I see spiraling coming in. Um, so the spiral process of knowledge is like a term of art in objectivism. And this is my understanding of it, and it's how it is incorporated in my theory. Let's see. So here's an example. Kepler observed the planets moving in the night sky, and Kepler knew from Copernicus that the sun was at the center, not the Earth. So he had that part right. And from those observations, Kepler was able to make generalizations. So, for one, all the planets move in an ellipse, sort of an oval shape. Then they speed up, and then to put it, and there's another law. I forget, is it the third, something like that? But to put it crudely, objects speed up. The planets speed up and slow down depending on how close they are to the planet. He says it differently, but that's like the quickest, crude way to say it. So he has these two laws. Um, he has these two laws, and those are completely valid in their context. And then later, Newton discovers gravity. Now, what's interesting, Kepler knew that the planets moved like this, but he could never figure out why. He was able to systematize like how they moved, but he couldn't figure out why they moved like that. And he kept trying to think about like, okay, like how is it that the Earth is going around? Is the sun like doing this to it somehow? Is there? He thought there was some sort of force like pushing it along like this, and it turns out that that was just completely flawed. What's really going on is, and Newton figured this out. Newton realized, oh wait, the natural default is for an object to just move in a straight line. So it's moving in a straight line and then it's getting pulled towards the sun. And so it's moving in a straight line and then getting pulled in. So it turns. And if something turns constantly, it goes in a circle or an ellipse, like an oval path. So Newton figured that out. And so he realized, oh, it's getting pulled in. And that helped him, figure out gravity. And then what Newton was able to do, he was able to deduce from his law of gravity that that the planet has to move in an ellipse or a circle. It turns out a circle is a type of ellipse. So the planet's got to move in an ellipse, and it's got to speed up and slow down in accordance with Kepler's other law. So he was able to deduce Kepler's law from his own law of gravity, which was now Kepler's law was already known, but what Newton taught us is that Kepler's laws are a result of Newton's laws. They're caused by Newton's laws. So that's a spiral. So the idea is like there's the linear progression of just like I know some stuff and I'm just going to move forward to new stuff. And that can be inductive or deductive, where you just deduce from prior ideas and you just get new stuff. So that's sort of like a linear progression. But there's also a spiraling element where you look at the old knowledge in the light of the new knowledge, and that teaches you more. And what did we learn? Well, we learned that Kepler's laws are the result of Newton's laws. We learned that they speed up and slow down like that because of gravity, because they're getting pulled harder or softer depending on their distance based on gravity. And so that's the spiral part. You spiral back to that older knowledge, and your older knowledge is augmented when seen in the light of the newer knowledge. So that's how the spiral theory comes into my theory of induction. Is I kind of add some details about how the spiraling works.
I see.
Spiraling's from objectivism. Yeah.
And presumably, as we spiral along, there's some force pushing us the whole way as we keep spiraling out to new knowledge. I am. You did say something very controversial earlier, which I think we skipped over. Which is you think a whole lot of these modern physicists are just wrong about a whole lot of things. I think the video I saw on this was you believe that there is the luminiferous ether, which is like this substance that is what light moves through, like how we have sound waves and they can move through air or metal or whatever. You think that light is moving through this substance. Now, if anybody in the chat has taken a physics class, they'll probably be thinking, whoa, didn't Michelson-Morley disprove this? So, I mean, what is it that you think? Let's go with the ether first, and then I suppose we can broaden out to what is generally wrong. Why are we getting these errors in general? So why is there an ether?
So the reason I think there's an ether is because basically there are waves. These waves have to be a wave of something. A wave of nothing makes no sense. That's a very crude argument. I give a more detailed argument in my videos, and I'm actually gonna give the final argument in a video coming out on Saturday. But yeah, I'm giving like the fully fleshed out argument on Saturday. But that's sort of the quickest way to think about it. Is first you have to think, what is a wave? And the way I would define a wave is it's a phenomenon where the value of some property grows greater and smaller over time at different locations. Okay, so you have this, something's getting bigger and smaller. Okay, what could it be? Well, in a string, the position of a wave is the position of different bits of string are literally going up and down. In a sound wave, the pressure of each location is getting greater or smaller. In the case of light waves, we don't know what the medium is. We can't say it's a pressure because we don't know what the substance is. And like, is it compacting? We can't say it's strings at every location. It probably isn't. We don't know what it is, but it's something. And that something has a quantity that's getting larger and smaller at each location. What is that quantity? It's the electric and magnetic fields. What are those exactly? The electric and magnetic fields are the amount of force that a charge could expect to get at any given location, roughly speaking. And that quantity, that amount of force that could happen at that location, gets greater and smaller over time. And I don't think these properties, these electric and magnetic fields, be properties of nothing. You can't, like, nothing isn't a thing that can have properties. So these are very metaphysically based arguments. And actually, and this actually brings us to the final part of my theory that we haven't discussed yet, which is methods of inference. And I think that basically when we make deductions in science, we need to be very careful about our metaphysical assumptions, our assumptions of like the basic nature of reality. I think that plays a big role in how to properly interpret the data. basically. And so there's a part of my theory that goes into that. And I have a video called Broad Physical Categories that goes into this basically, where I talk about like what is an entity, what is a property, what is an action or relationship. There's these like basic words that we use all the time. And we really ought to know what they mean exactly before we use them in science, because it's very important to use them properly, because otherwise it's not just words, your reasoning ends up wrong if you use the words wrong when doing science. So that's why I think there's an ether and like the reasoning that led me there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think this is related to I describe it as scientism. Other people have used that term before. Basically, the way I define that is when somebody is taking, because basically no modern philosopher, apart from Ayn Rand and her descendants, thinks that there's such a thing as, or I suppose Aristotelians will think this as well. Most of them don't think that there's even such a thing as metaphysics. They just go right into their epistemology, and that's that let's call it a day there. So I think in the void left there, people are trying to place their own specific field where metaphysics should be. You get this all the time. Like,
okay.
You know,
I was. You probably saw me frown when you said the word scientism, because I've heard that word used basically by religious people who are trying to bullshit their way into like belief. But yeah, I like that new conceptualization of scientism, where you use science for things you shouldn't use it for. Yeah.
Yeah.
But go on. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. It's like any mathematician who comes along and says, well, mathematics is the language of the universe. It's the really real thing underlying everything. It's the one in the many. Or a physicist will say like, oh, well, it's all quantum field theory, and that's metaphysics. And, there are these things called singularities. And who's this Aristotle guy saying that infinity isn't an actual, it's, or even, everything is just based on your perception. So it's all psychology at the end of the day. And, any type of field you can think of, there's some sort of believer in scientism who is taking that field and placing it where metaphysics is supposed to be. I think the big benefit of objectivism is that we have a proper understanding of metaphysics, and we know that existence exists and metaphysics is therefore at the root, and that's where we need to start.
Yeah. Well, I really like that. Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
So this is a bit of a change in topic, but we can get back to other things as they come up. So we haven't spoken for very long, but I remember you said that so you hated your physics education. That's one of the things you mentioned in our chat before we talked. Why is that? Because I also hated I have a master's in physics, so I went through 6 years of hatred, but I hated my physics education too. So I'm curious why you did.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've got the it completely down why I hated it. But I think it definitely has something to do with the fact that I just felt like I was wasting my time. I felt like there was nothing really that interesting going on. And I mean, one concrete I can give as to why I didn't consider these people worthy of my time is like, my first year physics lecture, one time she comes into class, it's like, oh yeah, I won't be lecturing on Wednesday because I'm going on climate change strike. And I was like, well, fucking Jesus Christ, this is not a person I want to be learning physics from. I don't care for this at all. So it's just a bunch of stuff like that built up over time. Meanwhile, I'm just getting way more interested in doing philosophy, and I'm like, I don't want to do this as a career. So I left university and decided to spec elsewhere.
So it sounds like a lot of it was how'd you put it? Like kind of an opposition to the current state of academia. Mm-hmm. Not so much physics itself.
Yeah. Because I was always a big fan of physics when I was like a little kid, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Because my thing was always, oh, philosophy. They just talk a bunch of nonsense in philosophy. Nobody wants to be a philosopher. They just
Uh-huh.
they just go ad infinitum on bullshit. I care about reality, so I'm going to be into physics and mathematics and stuff. Which is
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's what got me into physics despite that's what made me a physics major despite the fact that I was already thinking about philosophy. Um you can make you could have made the argument to me at the time that I should have been a philosophy major. Um of course I shouldn't have. I'm glad I got a physics major instead because it just wouldn't have been useful information. The physics gave me some stuff that was more practical to know. But of course, the thing that I was really interested in was actually philosophy. Um, so um, so yeah. But I hope my work can help you rediscover your interest in that because I think one direct application of all this philosophy, all this questioning about like how do we know things, how do we basically epistemology, the cashing out is in the sciences, whether that's physics or your own personal life, the science of just improving your own life. Maybe it's weightlifting or something. You can use your epistemology in weightlifting, but like whatever the case may be, that's really where you cash this stuff out is in some kind of application. And that's what I want to show with my theory of induction. I don't want to just write the theory of induction and say like, okay, there, like I've solved this abstract problem. I think the real proof that I solved the abstract problem is to concretely apply it toward discovering new physics. So that's the that's the thing I want to do.
Yeah, I think it's a very
Um,
important problem, very important work that you're doing. Because I've never heard anybody speak about physics in the way that you speak about it. Maybe Leonard Peikoff does a little bit, but he doesn't. He's obviously not a physicist, so he doesn't talk about it in depth at all. Um, but you talk about it in like um, a way unlike anybody else who talks about it, where they're just like, oh yeah, and then the scientists, they say there's these things called quantum fields, and then that's the end of it. You go in and you say,
uh-huh.
well, let's actually tie this to philosophy. Let's go from first principles to figure this out, and that is, I think, very very important because I mean, just look at the past century or so. A lot of the big, brilliant things a few centuries in fact, we are having these days is coming from physics, right? Physics is very, very important to people's lives. And if physics can be steered away from horrid, bad philosophy, then maybe we can start doing the same in other areas, and then we can start having even more innovations. And, very quickly we could have way, way, way better lives. Um, and this all requires that the work is done to sort of properly ground these fields in sound philosophy. So I think that's a very noble pursuit you've got.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you've noticed that I think about physics differently than everyone else because I've always, to toot my own horn here, I've always felt that there's something I'm doing differently, and I'm actually not even 100% sure what it is. It's something like what you said. It's something having to do with like completely grounding everything. Like really, it's something like this. I think like I when I told you that light was a wave, I felt like I needed to tell you, well, what's a wave? Well, it's the increase and decrease of some property. Okay, but what is light? Oh, it's the wave of electricity and magnetism. Okay, but what do I mean electricity and electric and magnetic field? And and then I said, well, it's the force at any one location. So, and what that is, that's not necessarily a reduction to first principles. Because when I think of first principles, I think of like A is A, something like that. That's what I think of as a first principle. Although maybe we shouldn't call that a first principle because it's not the principle that comes first. It's like the most fundamental principle. But a lot of times when people say first principles, they mean most fundamental. Anyway, so whatever the case is, I'm not reducing it to fundamental principles. I'm reducing it to observation. Like, what is an electric and magnetic field? Well, it's the pushing of this. Well, is that pushing caused by action at a distance, or is it some entity at that actual location? Now, I end up giving an answer to that in my next video, but like you see, I've reduced the question of like, is there an ether from, oh well, there's a wave, and a wave can't be a wave of nothing. Like I've zoomed in on the observational evidence and like and how it and how that observational evidence actually conditions the abstract debate regarding whether there's an ether or not. Um, and and really make sure we're 100% clear in terms of the observations what all these terms mean, and only then can we make deductions from what's known. So that's what I really think I have to offer with my work. That's, or at least that's part of it, is like really go back to the evidence and make sure we 100% understand what we're talking about when we do physics. And I think we might be able to discover something new once we do that. So that's the idea of my project.
Absolutely. So then, do you think that the general error made by most physicists is then that they just aren't doing enough reduction to observation, or that they don't have the right conceptual hierarchy to do these valid inductions?
Oh, that's a good question. What do you mean by conceptual hierarchy? Do you mean more of like the fundamentals, like the metaphysical issues?
Yeah, so I'm referring to like how you've got your broad physical categories sheet, and I'm looking at it now, in fact, where, you know, maybe they aren't even caring about that there has to be an entity which is doing this action, right? So they just don't have the correct concepts. They just think that you can have properties of nothing, but the properties have to be properties of something, right? That is sort of what I mean by invalid conceptual hierarchy. And given your theory of induction, you have to have the correct concepts in place, and then you can get the valid inductions. So would it be that, or is they just not observing correctly enough, or just or both, maybe?
I think in terms of the observing, that's where they get it right, basically. I don't have advice to offer when it comes to better experimentation or better, methods of observation. There are people who like really study this stuff, and I have a friend who used to work in quantum optics, and he's just familiar with all these details of experimental method, and I have to consult him all the time on those details. Um, uh, where I can offer guidance is on two levels. Basically, make first on the level of these fundamental principles, like the broad physical categories, like having the right metaphysics. What are the basic ideas we bring to the table when we reason about this? But also, what are the prior premises we're reasoning from? What are the prior physics premises we're reasoning from? Because a lot of times these experimentalists, like I said, they'll be really properly interested and properly curious, and they'll know there's something wrong with quantum mechanics, and they'll want to replace it. There's a lot of people in quantum, but there's a lot of people working in quantum optics who they want a better quantum theory, but they don't realize that a lot of the assumptions they're bringing to the table are unchecked assumptions that really were never proven inductively in the past, yet they're still reasoning from them. So there's two pieces. There's these fundamental processes of reasoning from broad physical categories, and then there's that they need to think about better. If something's a property, it has to be a property of some entity. It can't just be a property floating around on its own. And that matters. Not only is that true, but that matters. And it's not just a word game. It's a fact about what entities are and what properties are. And then number two, all of this prior physics you're reasoning from, how do you know it's true? And are you 100% clear on what you're talking about when you reason from these prior pieces of physics knowledge? So those are the two things that I think I can offer modern physicists help with. Basically, I think they're astray on these 2 points and can be and I can offer something there. And then also just in terms of like how do you prove a scientific generalization? And I think my theory of induction can help with that as well.
Mhm. So I mean, let's put on our best pragmatist hat today. And
Okay.
when do you think it is? Um, let's say you get your full theory of induction, you've worked it all out. How long do you think it'll be before I can start seeing some new innovations in physics? Because that's all I care about with my
Yeah.
pragmatist hat on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good hat to put on. I mean, I think one should just always have that hat on, so to speak. Um, it's going to take a while. Right now, I've only reproven everything like up through fractions, basically. Um, and I've been making videos since June, so like 6 months now. Um, but and then for my theory, I've been working on it for years. Actually, I've only just started like doing the reinductions with my theory. Um, it's going to take a while, but here's here's the practical argument for redoing this. I don't think there's another way, because we've made certain mistakes and we don't know where they are. I've made some indications of some of the mistakes, like they don't think there's an ether anymore. That's one of the mistakes. They think there's properties just floating out there without entities it's attached to. That's a mistake. But the mistakes are more detailed than that, and they're cooked into like every little nook and cranny of the physics, and I don't know where they all are. And so, what's more important than tracking down all the mistakes separately is just restarting the foundation. That will actually be quicker than trying to root out all the mistakes. And you got to root out all the mistakes, because if you don't, any further reasoning from those premises will itself have mistakes in it. So, um, practically speaking, why do I do this? Well, because I love doing something new. I love attacking reality alone with my own brain. So that's just the kind of thing I have to do, because I constructed my soul to do that. That is what, when I was growing up, that's what I constructed my soul to do. It looks like from your smile, it looks like you've constructed your soul to do the same thing. It looks like.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So, how old are you, by the way?
I'm 23 or 24
Oh,
now.
dang.
Actually,
Okay.
I keep
Well,
forgetting
yeah,
the goddamn year
yeah.
with the fucking coronavirus. It's just so long of just
Uh
nothing.
huh.
I keep forgetting what year it is. But yeah, no,
You know what?
24.
Okay. When I was 24, 23, I would forget my age also.
Yeah.
I wonder what's up with that. I would keep forgetting. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so yeah. Anyway, so I mean, that's my reason, is because that's what I have to do. Like a lion has to hunt, I have to do this. But in terms of why is it why does my hunt matter? Well, it's because I think this is ultimately the only way to get the job done. I think it's a way longer path than anyone else has chosen to take. But if I don't do it, I don't think it'll get done. Oh well, that's not true. If I don't manage to finish it myself, hopefully someone picks up after me. But I want to get it done myself. So I'm going to take shortcuts if needed. I will try to find efficient paths through the non-essentials or around the non-essentials in order to get to the parts that will allow me to actually discover new physics. So I'll be on the lookout for that as I go, for ways to get it done faster. But I do think this whole process of reproof is necessary. How long though? Let me give an estimate. Um, I'm going to say something like 15 years. That's my estimate. Yeah, at the rate I'm going now, I think that's unless I hit like serious like roadblocks. I think the reproof process to really get it done completely is going to take another 10 years probably, and then that will arm me with, and then hopefully at that point me and some collaborators with the knowledge required to break into the next level. So that's the time frame that is probably a little optimistic, but I think it's doable if it continues at the rate it's going.
Well, then hopefully I can start seeing some John Galt engines by the time by the time I'm old. Then
Yeah.
So
yeah, that would be that.
Oh, sorry. You go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, that is ultimately the goal. Not necessarily, a John Galt engine, but some kind of exploitation of a new law of physics. If you find something new, there will be if you find new law, some new principle of physics, there will be a way to exploit it towards some new technology. I have no idea what that's going to be. Maybe it'll be a John Galt engine. Maybe that would be cool. But whatever it is, it'll be new. So we'll see what physical principles are out there to be exploited.
Absolutely. And we've got another one last item on our vague roadmap here, which is you think there's something else, or maybe not something else, but something specifically wrong with physics research. Do you want to just sort of explain what is physics research as it's currently done? Because I doubt most people know that. And what do you think is wrong with it? Is there something wrong with the experimental method? Like, what's going on here?
Oh, we put that down, and I actually deleted it from. I should have told you about this. I deleted it from my list because I have particular criticisms of the way research is done right now, but upon contemplation, I think I want to hold off on that because I don't want to criticize unfairly. So I'll just hold off on that for now. Yeah. So now, what interests do you have moving forward in math and physics? You also asked me about math and Harry Binswanger's view on math. I still need to read Harry Binswanger's stuff. Have you been reading what he's been putting out on philosophy of mathematics?
I have not read any of that, but I watched a video by a gentleman called Existence University, where he disagrees with Harry Binswanger. So I'll need to look more into that, because at some point I do want to make a video on mathematics. I'll probably also make one on physics, most likely using some of your theories here. But yeah, it's been a while since I've been on a STEM kick. I'm not that into it at the moment still, because I've still got to finish up on a video I'm making. It's probably not going to be for a while, but I do definitely want to do some videos on that, because I think I will be able to get a sufficient production quality to start pushing these ideas out even further beyond how they are being pushed out at the moment. So I think that would be, but I really need to deeply understand it, because it's been so long since I've done any mathematics or physics. I need to sort of get my mind back in the swing of it, as it were.
Okay. Well, if you want any help, you can send me your outlines, and I can give you feedback if you think that would be helpful. Because I'd love to see more videos, from objectivist adjacent people on math and physics. So keep at it.
Absolutely. I will definitely take you up on that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's everything I kind of wanted to say today. Did you have anything else you wanted to go over?
Nothing on physics. But some people in the chat are shouting at me to ask you about Austrianism, anarchism, and economics and stuff. We could do that now if you wanted, or we could have a separate discussion if you wanted to get your thoughts in order on it.
I'm definitely open to any other discussions for the next 45 minutes, any separate discussions, and then I'm open to any audience questions, but probably not on economics and politics. I do have opinions, but on those things, but I'm not. I don't study it specifically, and I really would like to focus on things that I understand super well.
Mm-hmm. That's perfectly fair.
So yeah.
So I suppose if
are there questions?
Uh,
Were people sending questions, or was it just all about economics that people were asking?
well, I just saw like 3 in a row. People were saying I need to ask you about anarchism or economics or something. That's the stuff I normally do.
We can talk about anarchism. We can talk if you want. We can talk about anarchism. I haven't thought about that in a while, but I am not an anarchist. I'm definitely in agreement with Ayn Rand's view of government, and I agree with the brief criticisms Ayn Rand makes. I think they're insufficient to really refute anarchism, but they're right as far as they go. But anyway, we can talk. So that gives you a brief sense of my context if you wanted to start something on anarchism.
Sure. So basically, I think that anarchism. Well, there is actually one question on AGI. If you want to, we could go over anarchism and then I suppose AGI, because I don't know how long we'll be even spending on anarchism if you don't look into it much. In my view, anarchism is just a certain theory about the law. It is the theory that legal authoritarianism is false. So legal authoritarianism, in my view, is any sort of claim when there's a conflict that I am right in this conflict, I should win this conflict, by the authority saying so. Whether it's like the village elder says I should win it, the god said I should win here. I say that I should have this property right because I'm big and muscly and I can beat you up. These are all forms of legal authoritarianism, in my view. And all anarchism says is that is incorrect. I think that is indeed incorrect. Now, I am a specific sort of anarchist, because that's obviously not a positive case for anything. That's not giving you a positive theory of property. I am an anarcho-capitalist, where I say, hey, I've got this thing called the non-aggression principle, and from the non-aggression principle, I can get you a theory of property, I can get you a theory of homesteading, I can get you a theory of how contracts work, yada, 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 yada. So I think Ayn Rand's problem, or rather her error when it came to attacking anarcho-capitalism, there are a few. I'll stick to just this one. Is that she has this implicit notion that the law has to be sort of made objective. I've heard some people describe it as that you need someone to be there to make sure that the law is objective, because otherwise people don't know what the law is. I think that is...
That's not my understanding, but go on.
Okay. I think that is an incorrect view, because I think you can discover the law on your own. I mean, I discovered the law. I was able to do it sitting in my bedroom. Murray Rothbard was able to do it sitting at his typewriter. I think it is possible to discover the law specifically because the law is this objective thing. It is an objective fact. And just like how you wouldn't need anybody to dictate what morality is, and morality would still apply, you don't need someone to dictate what the law is for the law to apply. Is basically what it's doing is, technically speaking, is it's freezing the abstraction of law onto the specific theory of law, which is legal positivism, which means that the law is whatever was posited by whomever.
And what you're calling, and it's free. You would say that it's freezing it to legal authoritarianism. Is that what you were calling it? The idea that there should be an authority who chooses who is right in a dispute?
Yes. Now, it's not necessarily also doing that. I think it is doing that, but at least Ayn Rand would claim that this proper government, that they would have moral laws. So she does acknowledge that there could be sort of she would call them immoral laws. I would just say if it's an immoral law, it's not a law at all, is basically the difference. So she's not necessarily a legal authoritarian. She's not saying that it's right that you should win because you just appealed to authority or whatever. She would think that there's like objective standards of like, no, don't go rob and beat people and stuff like that. So I think specifically it's freezing it to legal positivism, which is the thesis that law depends upon what we think up in some way. So I think I think that
I'm not texting, by the way. I'm taking notes on what you're saying, so I can understand it. Yeah. So legal positivism is the idea that laws are well. Tell me if this is too much of a. Tell me if I'm condensing properly here. I would say it sounds to me like legal positivism is the view that laws are made by people.
Yes, basically. I think the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy basically has that definition where they say that law depends upon social facts and not on ethics or anything like that.
Oh, okay. That laws are, yeah. Okay, let's see. Laws are social facts, not, objective facts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll start by addressing that. I do think that laws are made by people. I do think that laws are, in a sense, a fact about people and what they've instituted. So, in that sense, it is a social fact, I guess. But laws can be wrong. So to me, laws are an attempt at recognizing the way people should interact in a society. It's an attempt. So just like a concepts are man-made, right? Like there are no correct concepts out there in reality somehow. There are just the things. There are just the things out there. And our concepts are our attempt to categorize the things so that we can understand them and differentiate them from one another and understand their similarities. And in like form, the law is our instituted attempt to enforce, and I do believe the word enforce is the proper word and the proper action, to enforce the proper system of social, well, I was about to say social interaction, but there's a very limited number of social interactions that the government should control, and namely, the government should bar force. Anything else, people are allowed to do whatever the heck they want. But if they initiate force against one another, there's got to be a coercive government to come in and stop the force. Now, it's retaliatory coercion, of course, is what I believe, but it's a definite thing. It's coercion that the government has the right to use. But I'm getting off of this one thing. So one fundamental that I think we may disagree on is that I think that laws really are just a fact about people. Like, people make laws, but there are facts about man and facts about the interactions between men that the laws should try to reflect. And so that's how I would conceptualize these facts. What do you think about all that?
So I think that legal positivism, though it is the predominant thesis, I think it sort of, when applying it, people sort of implicitly assume a sort of that there is this thing called a state, and that the state is good, and that is where the real laws come from, the state. Because if we just take the thesis at its word, that it's just based on these social facts, um, like how it's a social fact that you should stand a certain way in an elevator or whatever. Um, that would sort of indicate to me that if a mugger came up to me, pointed a gun at my face and said, "Give me your wallet," that the law in this instance is that I have to give him my wallet. Because this guy is the one with force in this situation. The police are like 12 blocks away. They're not going to be able to do anything about it. And it seems like the law is this just constantly shifting flux that can only identify the actual winner in a conflict rather than who should win in a conflict. And this seems like
I see what you're
conceptually
saying.
strange.
Because sometimes the mugger is just, the government saying, "Oh, we need some of your money for welfare or for, a new bridge or whatever it is." Right? I can see why you'd make that comparison. Oh, I can see why you would say that the mugger basically is the law in this situation, if that's what you take the law to be. I see. Yeah, because you're sort of extracting. You're basically you're taking one of the premises here, and you're taking it to its logical conclusion. You're basically saying, well, it doesn't matter how many people agree on how the way force should be used. If it's just one guy enforcing his will on you right now, then that's like it's not just like the law, it is the law. If you're a legal positivist, this guy is just forming a state, within this 10-meter radius where people can't change what he's doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And this is a strange way to think about the law.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, and there's a logic to it. I'm sure there's some reason. Now, the legal posits. Let me make something clear. I'm saying that men make laws. I'm saying laws don't exist. I'm saying laws don't exist out there in nature. I'm saying that men make them. But there are facts out there in nature that the laws should try to adhere to. There are, and this is what the founders called natural laws. I think they would have made a distinction between natural laws, that is like the facts about man and his interactions with other men, and the laws of men, the laws that we enact, the Constitution, or the municipal laws, and that man's laws should be subservient to the laws of nature. That's the way I think they would have put it. And I actually think that there's a problem with talking about laws of nature. I'm going to make a video on that. I don't like the formulation laws of nature. But if we put those aside, I'm going to say, yeah, I basically agree with that. I think that's the right. There are facts about the interactions between men, and that the law should identify should crack on those. I think the legal positivist is basically saying, well, there are no laws of nature. There's just the laws of men. And if you think that, then yeah, the mugger is basically the same as the government. So I think I'm spending too much time on this. I think we both just disagree with the legal positivist. Let me look at some of the other things you said. So you said that you don't believe in what you called authoritarianism. I think I got the wrong word. It was something like that. You don't believe in authoritarianism. In other words, you don't believe that just because some authority made a decision about a dispute, that justifies the outcome. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that the way. Maybe I misspoke slightly. I'll just clarify. That legal authoritarianism would be the thesis that the way you justify some conduct with respect to property rights and whatnot is by appealing to whatever authority. And
so I definitely disagree with that also. And authoritarian, I was putting it in quotes. I will no longer do that, because that is what authoritarianism is, including and the ultimate expression of that is what we usually refer to as authoritarianism, Nazism,
Mhm.
communism, statism, where the state just has complete control over everything. Like, yeah, that's the right categorization, I
Mhm.
think. The place where I think we just so I agree with you there, but I think we need an authority rightly understood, where the authority is there to where there is a agent of the people of us who we elect to identify uh the laws of nature, if you will, make laws in accordance with them. That's what the legislature does, and then apply those laws to um, the interactions of men, and that's what the judicial does. I think that's a legitimate process. I think we need an authority in this properly understood sense, who is a servant of us, he serves us and provides this service, really, where he again identifies the law of nature, makes laws uh, to enact them in practice, and then enacts them in practice, and that's the police and judicial. So I think we need that. Otherwise, well, now I would ask. I think we need that. Now, what I would ask you at this point is, who do you think should make these decisions about disputes? If one person says, force is, you know, I'm, my neighbor's committing force against me, and the neighbor says, no, I'm not. Like, who? How do we adjudicate the dispute?
So, I'll respond to this in two parts. Because you've got the idea sort of modification on like pure positivism, where it's just all nonsense. Um,
Uh
which
huh.
is like the sort of founders view, the Ninth Amendment view that like, hey, there are these natural laws, and we want our laws to apply to line up with those laws. Um, I think this is basically just saying the same thing as the natural law theorists, but in weirder terms. Because it's saying basically, hey, this mugger, he might be coming up with this law at the moment, but that's a bad law he's coming up with, and he should have his laws align with the natural laws. But wouldn't it just be a lot simpler to say, hey, the law is he's not allowed to steal, so he shouldn't steal, right? It's saying like, it's sort of adding this extra step of like this pin of a law, and he can move his pin of law around wherever he wants. But this is just describing the actions he should take, rather than this vague term of law, which is what he's trying to do, I suppose,
What
or
what
trying
the
to make
mugger
happen.
is trying to do.
Yeah.
What the mugger is trying to do, or what you would say, what the state does when it confiscates our money for welfare, or even I think you would argue what the state does when it enforces really any legitimate um, law, such as barring murder, and I think I'm guessing you would say, well, I mean, you obviously want someone to stop murder,
Mm.
um, but you don't believe that it should be. Well, I'll ask you about that. I don't want to make assumptions about your view, but let me respond to what you just said there. I think we do need the extra step. Here's what I hear you saying. You're saying there's natural laws, then there's man's laws, and then there's the way we enforce man's laws. And you're saying, why do we need this damn middleman where we have man's laws? Can't we just enforce the natural laws? No, we can't, because we need to understand the natural laws. The natural laws are what they are, the facts are out there. But we have to grasp them, and we have to understand that we are grasping them. We may get it wrong. That's why we need, for example, a court system to change the laws when we find that we get it wrong. When someone, say there's an unjust law, and someone, an unjust law made by man, and it's appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court realizes, oh wait, this isn't a proper identification of natural law. We need to strike down this law. Of course, that's not how they do it nowadays, because we the founder's vision has been dashed across the rocks of bad philosophy, but that's how it's supposed that's the way I think it should work. So that's why we need the middleman. We need to, because you can't access truth directly. You must access truth somehow. You need to, yeah, you must access truth somehow.
But then can we not just say, like, for instance, my theory on law, which I lay out on my website, could we not just say, rather than saying these are Liquid Zulu's laws that he's proclaiming, we could just say that's Liquid Zulu's theory about what the law is, because we have this elsewhere in philosophy where we just say, hey, this is David Harmon's theory of induction, rather than saying this is David Harmon's law about induction or something like that. I don't know what the analogous word would even be.
We have Newton's laws, and I don't think that prevents us from seeing, like, oh, well, these are facts of nature, and this is Newton's grasp of those facts. And I agree with them. I think Newton got it right. And, maybe someone thinks, Liquid Zulu got it right, or whatever, right? So, and then in a sense, if someone reads your website and then they agree, then in some sort of derivative sense, it becomes that guy like understanding of the natural laws. Wait, so I don't see your point. I'm not sure what your point. Can you condense your point here that you're making?
Sure. So basically what I'm saying is that we can still have identification of natural law just be where natural law is just the law, and it's like, hey, John Smith thinks that the law says this, and Jules Smith thinks that the law says this other thing, and they can disagree. It's like how John might say that, well, metaphysics says this, and Jules might say, no, it says this other thing. I don't think we need to have the actual real in nature laws behind this sort of extra label, and we just sort of hide that away. And those are the natural laws that they were just trying to point at with law. Because then law is like identifying what people think the natural laws are, but why don't we just say this is what this person thinks the law is? That seems a lot more lines up with elsewhere, in my view.
Well, I mean, I would go back to our formulation of Newton's three laws. It doesn't seem like thinking of them as Newton's laws. It doesn't seem like that prevents us from grasping those facts.
Well, I think that there's maybe a slight equivocation going on here. Like, I don't think that law is necessarily being used in the same sense here. It's like when you're talking about a law of nature, you're saying this is a causal relationship, rather than like when you're talking about a law, you're saying this is well, I would say it's defined as this is who should win in this conflict. Because I think the only law is law, where you're talking about jurisprudence. I think the only law is the non-aggression principle, and from that there are a bunch of derivative little applications you can get from that.
In my view, like going way back to fundamentals here, I'm going to like step quite a ways back to some facts that I think condition the debate we're having right now. I think that I'm going to stop calling them natural laws, because I'm kind of like, I'm against the concept of natural laws anyway. So from now on, when I use the word law, I'm going to be talking about laws that men institute. Like the Constitution would be an example. So I'll start with this. There are facts about man. That's what I think the basis is in politics. That's the rock bottom of politics. Of course, politics depends on ethics and metaphysics and epistemology and but the rock bottom when it comes to politics is facts about men. So here are two facts about men that are uh, salient to politics. Number one, and these are just coming straight from Ayn Rand, by the way. This isn't me. This is just me repeating Ayn Rand. Number one, men benefit from being around other men. Okay, it's beneficial to be in a society. If it wasn't beneficial to be in a society, if we were better off alone, we just wouldn't be talking about any. We wouldn't have a need to talk about any of this. Okay, so that's an important fact. Okay, but okay, that's one. Another fact is that man's mind is his means of survival, and then a third fact is that men can stymie one another's minds. You know, someone can stick a gun in your face and tell you you gotta spend your money on this welfare program, and now you don't get to do what you wanted with your money. You gotta do it you gotta put your money towards that welfare program, regardless of whether you think it's worthwhile or not. You don't get to use your mind here. And when men don't get to use their minds, they survive less prosperously. And then ultimately, if they can't use their minds at all, they just die. And so that's basically what happened in the Soviet Union. So because they didn't get to use their minds. So like these are basic facts. In recognition of these facts, men create governments to secure their ability to use their minds. And so the ban on the initiation of force, or as you call it, the non-aggression principle, I think if we drilled down, there'd be differences between the way I think of that and what you're calling the non-aggression principle. That's why so I haven't had this discussion in a while, but you probably have with objectivists, and there's probably differences, but I think it's pretty similar, and that I think so. The principle that you shouldn't initiate force, that comes from these facts that I've listed off, so I think we recognize those facts, and then in recognition of those facts, we create a principle that force should be banned from society. And so we legitimately institute a government to make sure that force is stopped in all of its various forms. And the reason we need lots of laws, laws of men, the reason we need lots of laws on the books is because force comes in many varieties. And so we need different laws to ban the different types of force. And we need laws to restrict the government so that it doesn't start initiating force in its proper duty of banning it. So that's my structure there. What would you say about that structure?
So I think this is adopting perhaps Rand's biggest error, I think it is, which is I think the entire branch of politics is invalid. I think that it is...
Oh, whoa.
Because it...
Okay.
At least as it's been presented in various books, and in my next video I have various people presenting what they mean by politics as the branch of philosophy, and it's all just sort of throwing in this concept of, okay, well, there's going to be a government. How should the government be managed? I think this is implicitly collectivist. It is starting with, okay, well, we're going to have some sort of society. So how are we going to manage society? I think this is the wrong way to think about it. I think the correct way is what I describe as law. Law as the area of philosophy. I think it is a subset of ethics which deals with conflicts. So I'll sort of elaborate on what I mean by that real quick. Basically, if you have Crusoe and Friday on the desert island, there is one thing that concerns both of them, because there's two people here, is that because they have scarcity, they can get into conflicts, i.e., Crusoe could pick up a stick and want to use it to spear fish, and then Friday could try and take that stick off him to use it to stoke his fire. these
Mhm.
actions can't both take place at the same time. Crusoe can't spearfish whilst Friday stokes his fire. One of them has to exclude the other. This is what I describe as a conflict. It is mutually exclusive actions. Um,
Mm.
so they need some way to deal with this. Crusoe needs some way to like, okay, how should I deal with conflicts? And I think that is what law answers. It's how you, the individual, should deal with conflicts. And I think I've got a very long proof on why I think that you should always avoid conflicts, which I'm actually debating on Friday. Um, but that is, I think, the correct problem statement, at least, which is how should you
Mm.
deal with conflicts, not how should you run the government? Because I think otherwise you're sort of
Mm.
just packaging the government in there, just assuming it in the very problem statement. And then, of course, by the time you get to discussing anarchism, you're going to be like, well, this is nonsense. We're talking about how we should run the government. And these guys will want like competing governments or whatever. And we define the government as a monopoly and everything. It's like, well, yeah, if you define it in the question, then you're going to get that sort of thing. But I think this is, and like this is not how like any other branch of philosophy is even defined. Like they don't say, well, metaphysics is all about what is there, and also what's the one in the many. Epistemology isn't saying how do I know and why are my senses invalid. It's not grafting a specific position onto the problem statement anywhere else. So I think that's why we need to just get rid of politics entirely.
I see. So, I see. So, that makes sense. It sounds like you would say there is no politics. There's just social ethics, and specifically the problem of how do we deal with conflicts between one another when they come up. Is that a fair summary of
Yeah,
your approach?
yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, I certainly agree that if we assume from the outset that there should be a government, then that is a flawed approach. In like form, Ayn Rand and I believe that if you start ethics by assuming that there should be an ethics, that's a flawed approach. I think politics is in my now, however, we have different you and I have different starting points when it comes to politics. Or I shouldn't say starting points, I should say different fundamentals. Your fundamental the fundamental facts which give rise to social ethics for you, I guess I won't call it politics, but social ethics. The thing that gives rise to that field for you is the fact that men get into conflicts.
So
For me, in my
yeah, I just want to do a caveat there because I think that
mm,
social ethics would technically be um, a superset of what I'm describing as law, because you could have multiple people interacting and you could have legitimate questions about their interactions aside from them having conflicts. Whereas when I'm talking about
mhm.
law, I'm talking specifically about them getting into conflicts and how we should go about
So
dealing with
maybe
that.
we can call it. We won't call it politics. We won't call it
We could call
social
it jurisprudence.
ethics because so you'll call it okay, fine, jurisprudence. So I was going to say like conflict resolution, but yeah, okay, so it's jurisprudence, which probably means something like conflict resolution. But anyway, yeah. So my starting point, or rather, my foundational issue is different. To me, so I mean, so I gave my foundations. The foundations are: it's good to be with other people. You want to be with other people. Um, man's mind is his means of survival. How do we make sure that we're not stymie? How do we make sure we get the benefits of society while not stymieing one another's minds? So I'm not sure how to answer this next question, but I wonder if we could come to a resolution on this if we could answer this question. Here's the question: which of our starting points is right here? How do like you have your fundamental like set of facts that you're focused on. I have my fundamental set of facts that I'm focused on that comes from Ayn Rand. Is there a way to figure out which of us has identified the correct set of fundamentals?
Hmm. So your one is that it's good to live with others. What was the other?
It's good to live. It's beneficial to me to live with other people. My mind is my means of survival. how do I live with other people in a way where my mind is respected? So you can see I have I've kind of reformulated a little bit from a highly egoistic perspective, because ultimately I'm concerned about me. Now, as a secondary issue, I'm concerned with other people's rights, because the only way I get my rights respected is if we come up with some sort of system where everyone's rights are respected, because then otherwise, no one has any motive to agree to the system. Um, and then there's no logical, and then if some people don't have rights, like if we suddenly decide the Jews don't get any rights or something, then there's really no logical reason why I should have rights either, because the Jews aren't fundamentally different from me. So we need to really respect all human beings' rights, because otherwise mine are in danger. So that's where other people come in, but really there's an egoistic motive. And so that's my starting point, or again, that's my fundamentals that lead to politics. And you have different fundamentals that lead to your jurisprudence. And it seems to me like, the debate is really which starting point is better.
So I think I can answer that now then.
Okay.
Is that you are then assuming egoism in your statement of
Yes.
politics. I'm not assuming anything about what the specific legal theory will be in my statement of jurisprudence. So my theory of jurisprudence could account for the Nazis and talk about the jurisprudence of the Nazis or whatever. But your fundamentals for politics, it couldn't account for the politics of the Nazis or whatever. You couldn't talk about that. You'd have to say, well, that's not really politics because it's not egoistic. So it's something else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, but here's the, so your interest. So I'm interested in politics because I'm self-interested. You are interested in jurisprudence because you want to resolve conflicts. But let me ask you, like, why are you interested in solving conflicts?
Well, so long as you're acting and alive, you can get into conflicts. So it's for anybody, so long as you've got an ethics, you've got a law, because it's just a subset of ethics. It's just one of the, or jurisprudence, sorry. It's just one of the questions that is being answered by ethics. It is, hey, I am alive and I'm acting and doing all these things. So the problem of scarcity and the problem of conflicts just falls out. It's just one of the things I've got to deal with, no matter if I'm a Nazi or a communist or an ANCAP or whatever.
I see. Okay. I was a little confused at first, but now I think I'm getting unconfused as to your position. You're saying everyone has an interest, everyone, regardless of their ethics. You would agree that ethics conditions jurisprudence, right? That, like, the jurisprudence we select is like it's conditioned by the ethics we have.
Yeah. And also the metaphysics and the epistemology and everything.
Right. Now, it seems to me like what you're looking for is a jurisprudence that will satisfy everyone regardless of their higher principles in ethics, epistemology, metaphysics.
Rather, I want the statement of jurisprudence itself to be able to apply to all of them. Not necessarily my specific theory, because I don't think my specific theory would work for a Nazi or whatever. I think they would reject it, of course. But like this, I don't want to bake my theory into the problem statement.
Why not?
Well, because I think that is freezing the abstraction. It's like how you wouldn't go about defining metaphysics as metaphysics. It asks the question, what are the corollaries of the existence axiom? Because that is freezing the abstraction of metaphysics to the objectivist metaphysics rather than asking the question, what is there?
I mean, Yeah, and ultimately the problem with that is you're assuming something without proving it,
Mhm.
basically. That's ultimately like at the base level, the reason we don't want to do that is you're assuming something without proof and you're just reasoning from it without first proving the thing you're reasoning from. Okay. Well, but okay. I don't see how we are making that kind of mistake if we simply say, look, there's a correct metaphysics, a correct epistemology, a correct ethics, and now base a let us now identify certain egoistically beneficial values that we're going to achieve with this science called politics. I don't see an error in that process.
So
What
the
why do you think your process is better than that?
because I think you still are doing this, assuming things. You are in your statement of politics. You are assuming the objectivist metaphysics, the objectivist epistemology, up to the ethics, in order to get to the objectivist understanding of egoism. So you've assumed all of that if you were to get into a debate on politics, and you'd have to then hold that if you're debating a Nazi or whatever, you'd have to say, well, no, you're not even talking about politics. You're talking about gloop, whatever gloop is. You're talking about something else.
Yeah,
And we each have our own problem statements of each area of philosophy, and they'll each be different, and we won't be able to even talk to each other anymore.
interesting. Okay, let me see if I can understand this. This is I've never gone this deep with an anarchist. So congratulations.
Thank
Because
you.
I've had a lot of debates with anarchists. Uh and I don't think I've ever run into one who like has kind of gone this deep with it. Um I think we've gone deep enough to actually refute you though, which is good news for both of us. So let's see if you agree. Um Let me make sure I'm understanding you. So you're saying we wouldn't be able to convince a Nazi of like our jurisprudence, like of like a you know a rights respecting society because they disagree about, let's say, egoism. Um and so we wouldn't be able to convince them. Is that what you're saying? Is that your objection to the objectivist politics?
It's not that you wouldn't be able to convince them. It's that you can't
Yeah,
even
yeah.
talk to them on using the same terms. When you would be saying politics,
That's
that would
true.
be a different concept to when they say politics because you don't have a general term
Yes,
for it.
yes. Okay, I see. So let me make sure I'm getting it. When I say politics, I mean the science that emerges from the problems I've been talking about.
Mm.
When a Nazi says politics, he says, he might say something like, the things we do as a society to, secure the dominance of the fatherland, to ensure racial purity or whatever. I'm not exactly sure how they would arrange it, but it would be something like that. Um, okay, but okay, now how do we decide whether the Nazi is right or not? We decide by using ethics. We decide by saying egoism is correct and altruism is wrong. And so your whole fatherland, racial purity, blah, 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 it's all an altruist ethics. And that ethics is wrong. And that's how we know my definition of politics is correct and your definition is wrong. So what would you say to that? Uh,
Well, I would say then that politics is then being defined in a different way to every other branch, where the definition of politics, the very thing that politics means, the very thing that a person who's studying politics is studying, is then different for different people. So we need to use different labels then. We would need to say, if they're different concepts, then we need to label them differently. And, if philosophy is talking about the broadest abstractions possible, then these wouldn't be the broadest abstractions even. These would be specific theories that are based on prior analysis. So then politics still wouldn't be a branch of philosophy because philosophy is supposed to be as broad as you can get.
hmm.
We need like meta politics to talk about the
I
Nazi
mean, but
politics and the
you really do need meta politics. Like I mean, like that phrase is never I've never heard that phrase used, but like objectivism has a meta ethics. It has a like an enumeration of facts that condition the nature of ethics. And Tara Smith wrote on this. She has a what is it called? I don't think she called it meta ethics, but like that's what she's talking about. Like that, she talks about the objectivist meta ethics. Is it viable values? I don't remember. It's either viable values or Ayn Rand's normative ethics. I forget which. So, but she identifies the meta ethics. I think that's a valid concept. And like there is a meta politics. Like there's a set of facts that condition what the right politics are. And aspects of my own theory of induction actually come into play here. I think at different levels of knowledge, your concepts are legitimately different. So if you're a newbie who's, maybe, an 18-year-old, college student coming into, and he's starting to major in philosophy, then politics legitimately has kind of a vaguer definition than it does for me. His definition might be, how do we organize society? Like it's answers to the question, how do we organize society? And from that perspective, you have if that's what we call politics, you have a politics also. Even though now, like if that's what we call politics, you have a politics, I have a politics, the Nazi has a politics, if that's what politics means. And from this kid's perspective, that's a legitimate definition of politics. I think it's limited. He doesn't know as much as we do, but it's legitimate from his lower context of knowledge. Then later, when you start learning the facts that I think are relevant to politics, namely, the things I keep bringing up, that man's mind needs to be respected, blah, blah, blah. Then that motivates you to refine your concept of politics. It no longer just means, oh, well, how do you organize society? It's specifically, well, oh, wait, I need a justification for why I think society should even be organized to begin with. And the reason it should be organized, the reason we shouldn't just leave it to chance, is because these particular things are valuable, living with other people and making sure our minds are respected as we live with other people. And so that's what leads to politics. So the Nazi, and again, and all of that thinking relies on egoism. You can't have that without egoism. And the Nazi is just wrong. The kid is right, though not aware of some things. He's right but limited. And then the Nazi is wrong. Like the Nazi actually came to some conclusions that have no basis. So there's no, I in some sense, I don't think there's a way to convince the Nazi, because you can't convince him on the political level. You need to convince him on the moral level. You need to first convince him to not be an altruist. Then once he understands egoism is the proper ethical goal, then you can convince him of the right politics.
But you're saying
what
right
would you say to all
politics,
that?
but shouldn't politics itself be correct anyway? Because you are narrowing the abstraction onto where politics means specifically when it's egoistic.
You could, yeah. I mean, well, yeah, you can say it that way, but I can also back up to the student's perspective, and the student sees you and he sees me and he sees the Nazi and he says, oh, these are different politics. These are different views of politics, of organizing society. And he might decide that one of them is right and the others are wrong.
So I think this then ties into my view on what counts as a branch of philosophy. I believe Peikoff said this somewhere, where philosophy it comprises the broadest abstractions you can possibly make. Metaphysics is, in general, what is there. Epistemology is, in general, how do I know, and so on and so forth. And that's why we wouldn't accept how do we organize science labs as being a branch of philosophy called science labsism or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So I
Uh-huh.
think this, how do we organize society, is still not as broad as you can get. You can get broader because you first have to say, well, why should there be a society? It's, I suppose maybe that's just you would establish that in ethics, but then it's based on a specific ethical principle. But we need to be able to have like epistemology isn't based on specific metaphysical principles. You can still have epistemology if you're a Christian or whatever. You don't have to be like an Aristotelian or whatever. You can have, and I think my statement of jurisprudence satisfies this, like how the other branches are done, where you can have an answer because it just there just are there just is this thing called conflicts. So it's how do we deal with them? And it's just an application of ethics to one question. I wouldn't even have jurisprudence as a separate branch or anything. I would have it be just subset of ethics. So it's just within ethics, we have this question come up of how we should, like how we would have the question come up of how should we have a society. You would have the other question come up, which is how should I deal with the fact that I can get into conflicts with people. There is no big broad abstraction that we need to then separate out into a separate branch of philosophy. It's specifically applying ethics to some specific question, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Huh. Okay. This is it's coming together for me. Your view is coming together for me. Um hmm. So you're saying that philosophy properly understood is the broadest abstractions.
Mhm.
And so if if we define ethics as a part of I'm sorry, if we define politics as a branch of philosophy, and if that branch presupposes, say, egoism, then it's no longer a part of this broadest set of abstractions. Is that part of your argument?
Yes.
Okay, I see the argument, and I see the argument, and there's a lot of counter arguments I can make against the specifics of what you've just said. But I'm gonna step aside from all of that and simply say, and get right to the value heart of the issue here. It's first, let me just, isn't it important that your mind be respected? Let's make it personal. Isn't it important to you that your mind be respected?
Yep. Absolutely.
Don't we need, like, no matter what you call it, you can call it cheesecake if you want. Don't we need some kind of science to make sure you get to live with other people and your mind is respected? Don't you want that?
Um, Not necessarily a separate science, like how we wouldn't need a separate science to study electrons.
We need to achieve these goals. You want these goals achieved for yourself, right?
Mhm.
So all I will say is I'm not sure if this broader argument matters too much. Maybe it does, but I'm not sure if it matters, because the things I'm pointing to when I say politics, you care about them, and you should care about them. So the thing I'm talking about exists somehow, and it's something you should go after somehow. Where you file it in the order is kind of secondary. The important part is that it matters. And I mean, and now what I would say is the only now here's what I would say. I would say the only reason conflict resolution matters is because this matters. This thing I'm calling politics matters.
Um, so I think even if it was the case, that it's better to live apart, let's say, you still have to concern yourself with conflicts. Because you might be living apart with everybody, and then you see somebody on the mountain and they start shooting bullets at you. It's like, whoops, daisies, I'm in a conflict now over the use of my body. This is a problem for me. Even though it's better for me to be away from that guy, I still go into a conflict with him because there's a thing called scarcity, right? So you just can get into conflicts. So I think that matters no matter whether it's good to respect people's minds or good to live in a society with other people. I think those are just different ethical questions there. Is it good to live in a society? Is it good to respect people's minds? But that doesn't negate that that they don't get their own branch of philosophy called politics. That we can just talk about law, because law is what really matters here. It's resolving conflicts. It's dealing with conflicts. That's what every judge cares about. That's why people think that there needs to be a government to enforce rights. What are rights? Well, they're property rights. They are conflict-avoiding norms on my definition, right? It's norms that are telling you how to deal with conflicts. And if properly understood, they have to be conflict-avoiding.
Yeah, but like the fact is that it's so so what I hear you saying is that conflict exists even if you decide to live apart. But but here's the thing. You're not deciding to live apart. You shouldn't decide to live apart. So the whole question of conflict resolution in the absence of living in a society, like that question doesn't matter. The questions I'm talking about matter. And all of the questions you're interested pertaining to conflict resolution, they only matter because of the things I'm talking about.
I would say rather conflict matters wherever you have multiple people. If you have multiple people, even if they're trying to stay as far apart as possible, the fact that there are multiple people means that some nut job might come along and try and hurt you. And so it does matter to you, whether he's right or not to do that.
That's true, but I don't think this contingent set of facts and judgments matter, because it just isn't correct to live as a hermit. So the questions that come, the philosophical questions that come to a hermit's mind and a hermit's context of are they right to come kill me? Would I be right to kill this guy in response since he's shooting at me? These are legitimate questions for the hermit, but the hermit's choices are illegitimate. He should not. Although, I mean, well, if if you lived in the Soviet Union, then being a hermit might actually be a good idea, and then it would matter. But we don't want to. The whole point is to avoid being in the Soviet Union to begin with, and have a good social system where we have access to all the wonderful things that other people do for us. And so I don't think you responded to my thesis that the hermit's context doesn't matter.
So, but I think because we're talking about the broadest abstractions, we do need terminology to discuss hermit philosophies.
You want a system of ideas that applies to everyone, including the Nazi, including the hermit.
Not necessarily a particular system of ideas, not a particular ethics or whatever. I'm saying that the terms, we should be able to say that the Nazis have a certain theory of ethics, and that the Nazis have a certain theory of jurisprudence and epistemology and all these different things.
Okay. One of the things that you would say against me is that based on my way of thinking about all of this, the Nazis don't have an ethics because they have the wrong ethics.
Yeah.
Because for me, ethics means the science pertaining to how to live a happy life. And so from that perspective, I don't even recognize what the Nazi is saying as ethics. He's saying something, but he's not. It's not ethics. I see. This is pretty weird. Yeah, like I said, I've never gone this deep into. I suspect your reason for all of this is your reason for this is different from other anarchists. I think the reason I've never gone this deep with an anarchist is that you just have a very unique opinion on all of this.
Hmm.
Um, I was kind of entertaining the notion that you've like identified some of the assumptions that are implicit in other anarchists, but I don't think so. I think you just kind of have your own unique views. Um, um, Let me think about this. I think I can really answer. I think I can answer this from an objectivist perspective. Hmm. Leonard Peikoff, first, something I'll say is Leonard Peikoff addresses a similar issue, a related issue to this. Let me know if you've heard this from Leonard Peikoff. He identifies this issue as the issue of multiple definitions. I don't think that's the right way to say it, by the way, but he definitely says a lot of correct things about this issue. He basically this is basically what I said earlier, that the philosophy student legitimately has a different concept of ethics than the objectivist does. The philosophy student is able to identify both the Nazi and the objectivist as having different ethics. You know, the Nazi has a collectivistic ethics, and the objectivist is an egoistic ethics. Um, the objectivist, on the other hand, as you're saying, will, from his own concept of ethics, he will say, in a sense, that the Nazi doesn't have an ethics because the Nazi isn't interested in his own self-interest. He has an altruist goal. Okay, but here's the deal: the objectivist, in order to understand what it is the Nazi has, like the Nazi has something. The objectivist doesn't just suddenly forget that the Nazi believes in something as soon as he becomes an objectivist, when he transitions from being that student to becoming the objectivist. The objectivist is able to say, okay, the Nazi has an ethics, but he has an ethics in the less augmented sense of the concept. And so, even though these two concepts, ethics, are referred to with the same sound, ethics, um, they're different concepts. They really are different concepts. Um, and when you are, and the first concept of ethics is from the perspective of deciding how should I live my life. The second, more advanced concept of ethics is, okay, now that I understand that the only thing that's valuable in life is my own life, now what do I do to achieve that? That's the augmented form of ethics. But the objectivist doesn't lose the more primitive concept, which is still legitimate. He doesn't lose that more primitive concept just because he's learned more. He's able to hold on to that earlier context and say, okay, so for people who don't yet understand what I understand, I can talk about ethics in the less refined sense of the word. And from that less refined sense of the word, the Nazi really does have ethics. But now that I know what the right ethics is, I reject everyone else's ethics. And as a result, I reject a lot of other people's politics. What would you say to all that?
So I would say that even this unrefined form that the philosophy student has for politics, even that is not the broadest abstraction you can make. Because how should we organize society? Well, that's an ethical question. I also think that we don't do anything in
That's
the
true.
first place. It's I would rather have a problem statement as
Individuals
individualist.
making
Yeah.
choice. Yeah, I see. Uh Well, you can still refer to a we because someone can, in their own personal judgment, say, this is what people in general should do. Now I need to convince them, but like it's a fact that we should do X.
Sure, but this still is one application of ethics to some issue. So it's not the broadest abstraction you can get. It is so it doesn't deserve its own branch in any case.
Um, well, I mean, I'm not sure if it matters what I think it does deserve its own branch, but I don't think it matters. I don't think this question really matters for our discussion. Um, I mean, here's an important question. Are you an egoist?
Yes.
Okay. So you believe that one should act for their own self-interest and they should not sacrifice to others.
Yeah.
Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Couldn't someone make the same argument you're making against my politics? Couldn't they make that against your system of ethics? Couldn't they say, well, don't we want to come up with an ethics for people who believe in different metaphysicses and epistemologies than you do?
So
Because otherwise, you're restricting what you mean by ethics based on your metaphysics and epistemology.
so I'm not restricting ethics to mean egoism, and I don't have to come up with a specific theory of ethics for those guys. They can do that on their own. I rather I have to have ethics mean something where it could apply to whatever ethical theory you've got. They're all ethical theories. They're all theories about what you should go ahead and do.
So you acknowledge that you know all of the various altruist theories of ethics. You acknowledge that they are ethicses,
Mm.
just as I do. And just like I do, you think they're all wrong and that Ayn Rand is right about ethics.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's a lot easier than
I
having, trying to freeze the abstraction anyway. I mean, I know the altruists have a lot of success with freezing the abstraction of ethics to mean altruism,
right.
but I think it's just a lot simpler to just think about, okay, ethics is just saying what you should do, right? Metaphysics is just saying what is there. Epistemology is just how do you know these things?
Okay. I mean, I agree with those definitions of the branches, but I also think now. Do you agree with me that that once we well, no, I'm not going to go in that direction. How much time do I had? I've gone over what I wanted to go over because this got so interesting. Um, okay, 7 more minutes, and then I really do have to go. This has been really fun. Yeah, this is like I said, you've gone deeper on this than I've ever gone with an anarchist. So, and we're getting into deeper questions here. I don't quite understand like your position, but I'm glad we're talking about all of this. Um, hmm, Okay, what do I want to ask you at this point? Hmm, hmm, hmm. Um, I think you still have not addressed something I've said. At least I'm not remembering how you addressed it. I pointed out some things that are important to an egoist, and therefore they're important to you. You want to live with other people, you want your mind respected, and I forget you agree that these are important things. Um, wouldn't you agree that wouldn't you then agree that the only reason we care about conflict resolution is because of these things?
So that might be why you care about avoiding conflicts. But if you were not an egoist, then your non-egoism might be why you care about initiating conflicts. And that's why I don't have jurisprudence being defined as how should we go about avoiding conflicts. It's what should you do about conflicts.
Well, I think conflict is you don't want to avoid conflicts. You want to resolve them, and you want to resolve them while respecting everyone's mind. Except, of course, aren't those who are initiating force. You use coercion to stop their minds from doing what they want to stop their minds from initiating on us. I'm really trying to dig into your fundamentals here, and I'm just really having a hard time. Why does it matter? Because, like, you're an egoist. So why do you care about conflict? I'm still not getting it. You're an egoist. So why do you care about conflict resolution aside from the things I just brought up?
So it's because I know that I can't cheat reality to get a value. And Guy is going to be really happy that we finally circled around, because now we're here, Guy. Okay. So the reason why I care about conflicts is that I can't gain values by cheating reality. And I think that anything other than the non-aggression principle fundamentally is based on the primacy of consciousness. And now, because you're limited on time, I can't go over the foolproof of this. Basically, I'll give a brief summary, is that there are 3 different ways that you could answer the question of how do you deal with conflicts. There's 1, the non-aggression principle, avoid conflicts. 2, law of the jungle, just go ahead and do whatever you want, just engage in whatever conflicts you want. It doesn't matter, might makes right, all those sorts of things. And then the third one would be some mixture of the two. Mixed law, I call it.
Okay.
And I think the primacy of, the law of the jungle is easiest to see. That's just clearly some sort of whim worship. This is legal because I feel like it. I should do this because I feel like I should. Which is then based upon primacy of consciousness, because I can just wish things into reality. Because I feel this way, therefore it is. Your mind is controlling reality. Then I think mixed law does this, and because the primacy of consciousness is false, law of the jungle is also false. Mixed law does the same in various ways. One way is, in my fool argument, I identify a bunch of different categories of mixed law. Not to sound too Kantian, I'm meaning utilitarian law as against Nazi law, as against yada yada yada. And I say hey, look, there's common threads amongst all these. Some of them are class based, where it's class A has different rights to class B, and that's false because it's arbitrarily particularizing between different groups. Like how you were saying earlier, where there is no relevant difference between you and a Jew, so it doesn't make sense to say that Jews shouldn't have rights, but you should, right? So that's false on those grounds. And then the other sort of one is the king said we can do this, so therefore we can do this. Well, that's just also whim worship. That's just the king's consciousness controls reality in some sort of way. And so that would also be false on primacy of consciousness. So I think the only thing which isn't falling into primacy of consciousness is the non-aggression principle. It's the only thing where you're sitting there and recognizing reality. You're recognizing the fact that you can't just have whatever you want, that you can get into conflicts with people, so you should avoid getting into conflicts with people, that person produced that thing, so you can't just take it from them, that's untoward, that you are undercutting the root of your own survival. The NEP is the only principle that recognizes all of these facts of reality. And so it's the correct principle of law. And from that, in my course, you can get it for free, I draw out every other thing we know and love from law, You can get out your contract theory. You can get out everything. I like to say if you have the NEP, you get property rights for free. And you just, from there, you just get everything else you could ever want.
So it sounds so. I'm not sure where we are disagreeing, but I think it might be a good place to leave the discussion by saying that the locus of our disagreement. Tell me if you agree that this is generally where our disagreement is. Our locus of our disagreement has something to do with our starting points, whereas my starting point has to do with I'm an egoist, so I want certain things. And in contrast, your starting point is it sounds like it's detailed in your course.
Actually, that argument in particular isn't in the course. I proved the NEP in a different way in the course, but this is the one I prefer at the moment. And it's basically, if your one is I'm an egoist, so I want certain things, my one is I'm an egoist and I recognize that I can't get the things I want unless I obey reality. And obeying reality requires I follow the NEP.
I see. So we have a different, that's interesting because it sounds like our justifications are very similar, but we have different justifications and therefore end up with different conclusions. And so I think that's something, so we haven't achieved the goal of convincing one another, but at least I think we've achieved something, which is to narrow down where the disagreement resides. And then from there, we might be able to identify, which of us is approaching it from the right direction, and then find out which of us is right, if any, if any of us, maybe we're both wrong. So I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. That's much more productive than most discussions I've had in general and with anarchists. So I really appreciate all your views on that and how deeply you've thought about all this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you for the free physics lecture earlier there.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Well, I should get going. Anything else you wanted to tell me before I go?
Nope. That should be good. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the one question, so I'll forward the guy to your Discord or whatever, and he can ask you directly. That's all right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you having me on the show, and let's talk again soon.
Absolutely. I'll see you next time.
Very good. See you, Zulu.
Yeah. Righty, and boop. No Q&A this time, unfortunately, because I'm very thirsty and very scared. Good night.